Hey, Jeremiah, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into our conversation. And I definitely want to explore, your kind of most successful project and work that you've done to this point in your business. But I thought that we'll start off by going back in time. When you look at your career, and I know you've had an interesting career in terms of working in different places, not always just being kind of in the corporate business world and so forth. I wonder what experience prior to starting your own consulting business do you feel was most helpful and valuable as you now kind of look with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, I was thinking about a similar question earlier today, and when I was in junior high school, we were in a really small school, so there were like 300 kids. So seventh and eighth grade and we were in an old elementary school that could barely house that many people. So I was a manager for the basketball team, the boys basketball team, and we had to share one gym for practices. And so someone would practice early in the afternoon, and another team would come in at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. And on the occasions that we had the 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night practice, the custodians and janitorial staff would always take their dinner break, and I would always pop down to say hello and see what they're doing and chat and talk. And my mom said at one point, "You're really good at like being able to have a conversation with anybody, no matter their walk
Mm,
of life or their station or whatever they're working on." And I thought about that because that led me into coaching and teaching and then to some of these other things. But really, the crux of all of that is in that junior high setting, the janitor, the teachers, the coaches, the administration are all serving one goal, which is the betterment of the students in that building. And if you
hmm
can figure out how to harness, but they're all doing it differently, right? Like the
Sure.
janitorial staff are keeping the place clean. The teachers are trying to teach and educate. The coaches are trying to teach, sports and discipline, and the administrators are trying to coordinate all of it. So they all have a different way of reaching the overarching goal, but they're able to do it together in rowing in the same direction. And I think that has struck me as one of the kind of narratives that have gone through my career, to be able to understand different constituencies and be able to talk to them and understand them, and then make sure that as we're moving either through a project or through an initiative, that each one of those stakeholders gets what they need to be successful in order for the overall thing to be successful. And I think that exemplifies what we've tried to do here with Showpiece Solutions and how I approach that work. So it's really kind of been there regardless of what industry or what work I've been doing, but it started 100 years ago when I was a kid, being a manager for a junior high basketball team.
Yeah, well, that's a great story, and I think though you and I have the opposite in hairstyles, we definitely have alignment around. I think the importance of connecting with different with people in all walks of life and having a real not only just being able to do it, but probably enjoying it. And as you translate that into working with organizations, or as a consultant or a leader of a team or in different firms, being able to not only connect with different people, in different levels of the organization is super important. But I think even more than that, it's like the empathy and to try and understand and recognize that what they're going through is different. So as you said, in that situation, like everyone's goals, or they're all working towards supporting the same thing, but they have different things going on in their lives that might influence how they show up. And for a consultant working, with a client or an organization, that often it's like you forget, like you're working with maybe your one main client, but you need to get everybody on board to ultimately support the vision or to support that change. So I think that's a great story. You worked in politics as well, and I wonder what that taught you, because for those that have not worked in politics, me being one of those people, I have no idea what it's really like. I mean, I've talked with many people over the years who have, but I'd love to hear your kind of experience around working in politics, and if there was anything from that you were maybe able to pull into now, being a business leader and working with clients and all the stuff that you do. What stands out for you?
There's some really rich experiences in public service, and I would recommend that anyone that has the chance to do it, because every day is different and you'll learn something along the way. every single day. It's hard, but it's also
Mm,
really fun because it's challenging. And I think the thing that sticks out to me is um, building an organization or an agency. And some of this you may hear me say small p political versus big P political, because again, it goes back to everyone is trying to reach some sort of excellence in what they're doing. It
hmm.
just may not have the rhetoric around it, right? Like they're trying to get there in their own way, and there might be an overarching rhetoric that gets us into that big P political space. So I like to keep it kind of the nuts and bolts. And I had the opportunity to work in municipal government and some other areas, but the municipal government piece is really interesting because I was working in the Midwest, and mayors in the Midwest get elected and reelected by their ability to pick up trash, to plow snow, and to fill potholes, right? And um, I'm sitting in Nashville, Tennessee, as we record this, and we're in the midst of a little bit of a snowstorm here, and that doesn't happen here very often. But it reminds me of we were working, and my agency was in public works, so we were responsible for those things I just told you that
Right.
gets mayors reelected. And we were having some pushback from some elected officials and residents in the city related to the efficacy of the snow plowing operation. When I asked those questions of our public information officer and our operations team, they're telling me, we're out there, we're doing it, it's happening. It's just people aren't seeing it always happen, or they think that we've skipped over their road, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought there has to be a better way for us to tell this story while we're out there on the news every day saying snowplows are out 24/7. We have this many crew. We're using this amount of material. And by material, I mean road salt and the like. And, these are the numbers behind it. We weren't really giving enough transparency into the agency for people to believe it. And
Mm,
so I talked with our operations team and said, how are we sure that the folks that are out there plowing the street are hitting their routes and doing the things they're supposed to? And they said, well, they radio in when they finish a route, and it goes into our it was called Snowforce software system, and so we're able to track where people have been and what they're doing. And I said, so interesting. So I called our IT people and said, hey, is there a way to build a communications bridge between what we're already doing onto like a adjustable GIS map so that we can now use this for our communications team, and it creates accountability for our team. So now we've
mm,
built communications and transparency, which leads to an overarching accountability to the work that we're doing. And it was highly successful in that the amount of complaints reduced immediately, the ability of our operations team and leadership to go look and say, oh, okay, why are we missing things in District 2, and or why is District 2 4 hours ahead of District 1? It created space for people to ask better questions so we could have
mm.
better answers in our communications channel. So I think I tell that story to say transparency is important, but
Yeah.
because it leads to accountability, which then informs your communication strategy so that everyone can feel like they have the information they need to understand what's happening, and also to tell us if we're wrong. But without those things, it was just everything's wrong, and we had
Yeah.
no ability to answer it.
How would you maybe take that same example and apply it to maybe something from within your business right now, from working with clients? Is there a situation that maybe was recent or even a year or two ago where that same kind of approach to transparency, to focusing more on communication, that you could just talk about or share?
Yeah, I had a recent project actually that it's similar in the context or in the framework, if you will. The client at the senior leadership felt like they had a personnel and a people problem, and I was able to dive in. And by the way, the work we do here it's not transactional. This is really deep work. Like we dive
Mm,
in, we sit next to you, we try to become a part of what you're doing so we can understand it, kind of as we talked here earlier in the podcast. But so the overarching question was, we think we have a people problem. Can you come help us solve this? Sure, let me take a look. But and the data showed that they did have a people problem. But if you dove into the qualitative data, but if you dove
Hmm.
or quantitative, sorry, if you dove into the qualitative data and talked to their team, what was really happening is they had a systems problem. And that's where, you know, this snowplow, the snowing operation is the same idea. It's the people versus systems, and there was a gap in the systems that now allowed the people to be successful. So in the recent scenario, we found that they could throw as many people at these issues as they wanted. The infrastructure, command and control, and the infrastructure around the work those people were supposed to be doing wasn't
Hmm.
there in a position to support them for them to be successful. And so it's going to continue to just spiral into this. We have a people problem. We have a people
Right.
problem. And so that's how and we only figured that out by really candid conversations with
Yeah.
people up and down the org chart to understand where the failure points were and where the pain points were, and then took a comprehensive look at what they were actually trying to accomplish,
Sure.
and then be able to say, okay, well, here are the three kind of failure points along the way that makes it look like you have a personnel or people
Mm.
problem, when in fact you have a structural problem related to the systems you have in place.
At the beginning of that engagement, before you maybe, the proposal was signed or agreement signed, like before you actually kind of went into the building, did you have a sense that it was not a people problem, or like that there might be more going on? Or were you thinking, yeah, okay, the client says this is a people problem, let's go and fix the people problem? Like, what was your kind of perspective on that early on?
I always take folks for their word and what they say, but also will ask them harder questions than they may have thought through.
Yeah.
And it usually starts with, okay, well, how can we think about this differently?
Mm.
And everyone has an idea about what that might look like, right? But it also gives you a glimpse into the areas where they aren't necessarily exploring it, but they've had the thought. And so you can peel the onion back on some of those things and see if there's any fruit on the other side of it, by asking questions like that. Or I had a contractor working with me on that particular project, excuse me, and she always laughed because every time we engaged with the client, I would always end the conversation with, "What have we not asked you that we should have?"
Right. Yeah.
And you're always going to get, you know this better than anyone, you're always going to get really rich information out of that, because they're expecting one avenue here, and we may drill down through that, and I may have been able to explore some areas so
Mm.
that they hadn't thought about previously. But the same holds true for them, right? They might have expected me to be working down avenue B, if you will,
Yeah.
and we didn't touch on that enough, and that allows us to even further conversation, which starts to build that trust and transparency so that we can have really candid and hard conversations when we need to.
What percentage of your business today is public sector?
I would say it's roughly about 50-50, frankly.
Okay.
Some of it's in connection with other firms doing work for public entities.
Okay. I asked that question because oftentimes people's experience with public sector work, especially if they're new to it, is it's very slow moving. It's, hard to even get in with the RFPs and these big documents. So you have a unique kind of experience or maybe angle or view on this because you've worked inside kind of the public sector. You now also consult and work with clients inside the public sector. What do you think people often misunderstand or don't see, that if they saw it, if they truly understood it, they would likely be more successful working with public sector clients?
Um, they take generally folks have a tendency to take what's in the RFQ or the RFP and respond to that and that only.
Mm.
And they spend a lot of time in those documents saying, here's everything we've done in the history of our company, and here's why we're relevant. And if you're responding to that RFP or RFQ, you're already relevant to some degree, and the qualifications, in my mind, become a secondary or tertiary priority, rather than, do you understand what we're asking you to do and what value can you bring to that question or that issue, and
Mm.
hit me with that early. Now, I say all that because that's how I wanted to read those things when I was sitting in that chair. But on this side of it, it is really hard to respond to an RFP or an RFQ and not jump in with, here's why we're credible, and here's the history of our firm and all the things we've done. And oh, by the way, here's our project approach. Here are the things we're thinking about. Here's how we can help you.
Mm.
It's a real, and you fight it all day long. You know, one response you might do it, the next response you can't, because you just can't get yourself to get away from trying to create your credibility off the bat. To me, I would love, it would be refreshing if people, and even folks receiving them, or would write them in a way, tell us what you're bringing to us, where's the value, and what are we not thinking about, and then give us that stuff on the back end, and we'll look at
Mm.
credentials and so on after that, you know, later down
Yeah.
the priority list.
And how do you think about public sector work? You know, from the perspective of private sector clients, you can directly interact, right? You can build that relationship. There's a lot more kind of quote unquote control over that process. Whereas with the public sector, in many cases, you may not actually know, you know, who the real buyer is, or it's hard to get a direct line to talk with that decision maker before you submit your response or your proposal. So I'm just wondering, in terms of when you think about growing your business and what you can control and what you can't control, how do you personally, Jeremiah, go into thinking about selecting to work with public versus private sector? And of course, I mean, you have a 50-50 balance, so there's some diversification there, but just, yeah, how do you think about those two kind of lines of business?
Um, a couple of ways. From the public sector perspective, of course, once those requests are on the street, staff can't talk to anybody, right? So the relationships have to be built long before
Before, yeah.
that work hits the ground. And that may not ever go anywhere, but that's the challenge with business development across for any industry, frankly. But I think that you learn, and some of the stories we talked about already, if you can build those relationships, people are paying attention to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're able to respond to those documents when they hit the street, it helps you do that. And so for me, the public private relationship building doesn't change, because that's how I approach all of it. And that's where all of my work to date has come from. I have not had a client that hasn't been a return client in the history of my firm.
Mm.
So we've been able, because of the relationships we built, and as I said earlier, we sit alongside, we help them become successful so that, you know, they achieve what they need to do. And by the way, we'll probably make it better, and that helps them build a legacy moving forward. So every client that I've had to date has re-engaged in another project or initiative since the day we opened the door, and that's something
Mm.
I'm really proud of. So that also makes some of the work in business development even more challenging, because now you've got to continue to keep those relationships intact and full and strong while you're going out to build the others. And then, you know, it's the word of mouth, it's the strategic partnerships. I think that as a consultant, we have a tendency in the industry, if you will, to say, hey, we can help you, we're really smart. And we don't always take that advice for ourselves, right?
Sure.
So I've done that a couple things internally to help the firm be better, but it's certainly looking for strategic partners to go get some of that work and maybe tie
Mm.
into the work they're doing, so we can talk about it from an overarching package, rather than each of us trying to fight for some piece or some RFP, you know, kind of back to the public sector space. So those strategic partnerships and those relationships are really, uh, to your point, a fast track, if you will, on that long runway in public work.
Right. So you mentioned that every client that you've had since you opened the company has come back at some point for additional work. I think that's a situation that most consultants and firm owners would love to be in, right? That's a very positive thing. You said that's a result of working closely, caring, you know, being human, investing in the relationship. And all that, Jeremiah, sounds great, but that's the same kind of thing that really anybody might be able to say. So I'd love if I could just like push you a little bit more there. If you can think about, and what I'm trying to get at is, what could somebody maybe learn from what you're doing? What's maybe something tactical or just something that you've done that you think maybe others don't do or don't do enough, that is paramount and key to that kind of return, you know, recurring business from clients?
Yeah, I think it's answering the next question and solving the next problem, right?
Mm,
Like so, but I talked about candor earlier, and there are times when I'm going to say things that they don't like, and I don't think a lot of people in the consulting industry like to do that because they don't want to ruffle feathers or upset
right.
a
Sure.
client. I'm the guy that's going to say it,
Yeah.
and
How,
then
and
then
how do
we're
you
going to
say it
deal with
though?
it.
Yeah. Like,
Well, it
so sorry to
depends.
interrupt. Like, yeah, tell me,
Yeah.
like, because some people don't even know how to bring that up for the exact reason that you mentioned it. So, is there some language, right, specific word that you use that you find tends to, like, do you ask, for example, is it, I'd love to share something with you that X, is that okay with you, or do you just come out and say it? What's your approach?
It depends on the setting, frankly.
Okay.
Uh, I think there are a couple of different ways you could do it. So, for example, if you have something that you're going to say to a client, I'm thinking back of the systems problem, not people problem client.
Sure.
I knew I needed to give them some challenging feedback. And so I kind of said that. We went to happy hour and dinner, and they're like, "What do you think? How's it going?" I'm like, "We'll write the report. We'll get some actionable items back to you, but this is going to hurt."
Mm,
So you kind of throw the test balloon a little bit, and then um, I pulled the CEO aside in a later meeting before we presented to his leadership team and said, "Here are the things that we're going to talk about in this report, and I need to make sure that you're okay with it, and or if you want me to tone down, uh, the tenor, the delivery, whatever." And I expected copious edits and that request, and he said, "No, you're good. Go ahead." And so now we're in the full leadership team, and that was essentially the support the CEO gave for me
yeah.
to say, "Okay, guys, here's everything." And I promised you when we started this engagement to be completely candid and full transparency on everything we've done, and you saw that in the report. Now I'm going to give you our thoughts and our tactics to help move you forward. If you so choose to do that, we think this is the right way to move forward. Let's argue about it. Let's discuss it. Let's agree or disagree, and then build a priority system coming out of that. So that's an example of how to do it. There are multiple ways, but you can't the other way you would do it is on the front end. You would ask the really challenging questions when you're looking at this qualitative data to try to understand where their triggers are, where they're sensitive, where they're not, and how you might be able to use those to the advantage of not only the work you're doing but the firm moving forward. And some of that's just you're getting them to think about things a little bit differently, and that allows you to deliver some more critical feedback if it's so required. And it's not always required, right? But to answer your question, in this scenario, excuse me, it was required, and
Yeah.
that's how we went about it.
No, I mean, you make a really important point, and I think this is an area that many consultants, even sometimes those that have been in the business for many years, hesitate or feel a little bit uncomfortable around, which is giving real um, candid feedback and being direct with clients. But in my experience over last couple of decades, that's what good clients want, right? They're not bringing a good client doesn't bring on a consultant just because they want to hear the same things or have a yes person around them. They're already surrounded by those kinds of people. They want help, they want change, and so they're looking for a real expert like that. You've mentioned throughout the conversation so far, Jeremiah, we. So explain we. What does the company look like in terms of the structure? And because I know you've also talked about contractors and bringing people on, so just explain for everybody joining us what does your company look like? Structure, number of people, just
Yeah,
lay that out.
so it started with just me and an email address,
Yeah.
as they all do, right? And my first client actually was trying to hire me full time, and I said, "Hey, what if we think about this differently?"
There you go.
As we've
Yeah.
discussed here. And I essentially said, "I don't think I can have the impact you want me to have if I'm inside the organization. So would you consider building a different relationship here?" And that's where the shingle went out, and they became my first client and have been a client from day one. Um, So that was really fun and exciting and scary, as everyone that's been on your podcast with you talks about. And so I say we for the firm. I try to think of the firm as separate from me,
Hmm.
even though I'm driving it here. And then we've done work from everything from small engagement to helping municipalities figure out a new drinking water source to building a stormwater utility as a municipality was in negotiation for a consent decree with US EPA for storm sewer overflow, etc., all the way up to large scale events like Super Bowls and national special security events. So think
Mm.
presidential conventions to presidential inaugurations, like those type of large scale events. And it's been a contractor model to date in that I bring people along as I need their subject matter expertise and or assistance in certain ways, and those folks ebb and flow in and out of the organization depending on the scale of the operation. So anywhere from 25 folks to 250 folks, and
Mm.
budgets from a couple 100,000 to um, 100, over 100 million,
Mm.
related to what the project or the initiative might be.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, yeah, what's been your biggest project to this point? It sounds like maybe managing or being involved in a project that's 100 million or something somewhere along those lines. Of course, that's not 100 million coming into your pocket. I would
No.
imagine. So how does that flow? I mean, just people might be interested. I'm interested. Let's say you have a project that's 100 million dollars, right? You are your lead on it, or you're playing a big role. But there's a lot of other companies. So how do you manage that in terms of bringing in all the different people, all the different contractors, all the different vendors, providers? Is all that kind of coming through your company, or are you finding a separate project manager that's managing it, or a separate company? Because when you have hundreds of people, for a one-time event that you're working towards, that just managing the communications of that is a full-time job, never mind everything else going on. So how do you go about managing a project of that size?
It depends on now I sound like an attorney. It depends on, depends on
Disclaimer, this is
the,
not
right,
financial advice. This is not legal
right.
advice, everyone. Let's make that very clear. But
That's
yeah,
right.
share what you can.
But
I
it,
mean, just interesting to know
sure.
kind of how you would go about, or how you think about a project of that size.
It depends. It depends on the project and the scope and magnitude, right? So there are going to be folks, vendors, contractors, and others that bring an apparatus with them that can be helpful to
Mm,
help you either build up to those numbers. And I'm thinking more in line with your question and related to the number of people required to pull this off. So
right.
they may have an apparatus. You may bring them in as a vendor to help build the apparatus around all of the functions related to the people, while they're also bringing
Can
some
you give an
other
example of
techniques.
that? When you say
Sure.
apparatus, feels very technical. So what does that actually look like, or I mean, what kind of company might that be?
Yeah, I'll use so for example, the political conventions. The transportation team is a contractor that comes in, and while my team is overseeing the interaction between the event owner, which is the political party, and
Right.
the operational aspects of that, they are able to bring in their resources for procurement for motor coaches, et cetera. So for example, you're moving 20 to 25,000 people in and out of a basketball arena 4 nights in a row as quickly and as safely as possible so that someone can be nominated for president. That we're about to embark on that in the summer in Milwaukee for Republicans and in Chicago for the DNC. And
Mm-hmm.
so those folks are able to bring that apparatus with them that allows them to go procure 450 motor coaches and the
Right.
people behind it to manage that, while we're kind of, if you will, overarching puppeteering what that might look like. And then we work together operationally with other stakeholders, law enforcement, US Secret Service, the city, and so on, to
Yeah.
help make sure that that works, so that we can get those folks in and out of the event campus as quickly, reliably, and safely as possible for those 4 nights, so that one of our two candidates can be nominated for president, and then they're off off into the general election. So that's an example of
Makes sense.
that transportation vendor has that apparatus around them that helps strengthen what we're trying to do. Meanwhile, my team is still over here interfacing with all the stakeholders we need to, but there are also other pieces that don't touch that part, even if we're focused on the transportation aspect. Like how are people moving around campus from it? I've always thought of transportation not just being wheels, but also feet and wheelchairs and mobility assistance, right? Like, so how are pedestrians moving through campus to get where they need to go? What things do we need to be thinking about related to what our operations team is doing so that that guest experience from the moment they arrive in the respective city till the time they go home, we've thought about that guest throughput and transportation being a huge part of that.
So I'll play devil's advocate for a moment, because some people may be wondering this. So hopefully this serves some of our listeners or people viewing. And that is, why would a political party or a large organization select your company? You're small. If we're talking about a really big event, something that it can't go wrong, it needs to go right. It's, call it, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it might be, thousands or tens of thousands of people. Why would that organization select a small company like yours, as opposed to going and saying, like, let's get one of these quote unquote, larger, proven, bigger names to help us? Because sometimes, right, there's that belief in the marketplace and inside of lots of organizations that there's more risk selecting a smaller company or smaller firm, right? And so even if something goes wrong, it's better for something to go wrong with a well-known name, as opposed to picking a smaller consultant or firm where it's not as established. Now, most people know that's doesn't always make sense, right? And in many cases, the smaller company has significant advantages. But I'm wondering, for you in that kind of situation, why do you think that played out where you were selected? And then anything else that stands out to you in terms of how you position your company, because it sounds like you're probably winning business from other firms that might be in many cases much larger than your firm is. Any thoughts? Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, number one, we're really good. Number two, I start backwards. Right. So most people say, like, and I'll give a story to this here in a moment, but okay, what are we trying to, yep, we need to have this many people this way, and this is how we want it to work. I start the other way and say, how do we make this work from the end goal and work backwards, finding as many failure points as possible and then trying to mitigate against them with whether it's official or not, some sort of risk matrix, right, that gets us to decide, okay, if we're willing to take X risk but not Y, and that changes the scenario, and then we'll start scenario planning against those things.
And do you bring, I'm just want to interrupt. Do you bring that into, like, what you're talking about now, into the early conversation before, like, I guess my question is, how do you take that approach, which sounds like it's very powerful, right? Well thought out, would be very valuable for a client. How do prospective clients even know that that's something that you're going to do? Where are you communicating that differentiation or that valuable approach that you have?
I would say by experience and explaining some of those stories. So one example of this is I could do a million and I'm going to ship to a different event. But we were planning for, and this is where we made a mistake. So that's why this is fun. So the Super Bowl Boulevard is essentially an Olympic village around Super Bowl each year, which is about to happen in Las Vegas this year. Or maybe by the time this airs will be over, but it had happened in Las Vegas, in February. And I was fortunate enough to serve on the local host committee in Indianapolis for Super Bowl 46, where our leadership team created what we call the Super Bowl Village. And we spent 2 years planning against that because it was, we were going to have 2 stages, a zip line in the middle of Indianapolis, going 800 feet down a city street, 8 stories tall. 70, 90 concerts in a 10-day period of time, all in support of the NFL's event, which was the NFL Experience that took over, roughly 1 million square feet of the convention center for that fan interactive space. So we were like, cool, the NFL can have that. We're going to throw a party for everybody in Indianapolis that can't go to the game on Super Bowl Sunday, because most local folks aren't going to that game.
Sure.
And so we spent 2 years planning, what's that look like? What's the guest experience look like? Oh my God, we got to close all these streets. How are people going to get to work and move around downtown? We spent an inordinate amount of time building vehicular traffic patterns and what that would look like, communicating that, building the security apparatus around it, and so on. Where we made a mistake was we always kind of undersold what this village might look like from a attendance perspective. We always thought somewhere between, maybe 10 or 50,000 people over the course of a day would kind of roll through here, have a beer, watch the chainsaw ice sculptor guy build something cool, jump on the zip line, and go home. What happened was, Michael, you and your friends came down on Wednesday, had a hell of a time, and you told all your relatives to come with you, and you all came back on Thursday, and then you came back with more people on Friday, and it grew to, by the time we got to the Friday night before Super Bowl, we had 250,000 people in a 3-block area in a downtown environment with nowhere for those folks to go. So the failure point was we were more successful than we thought we were going to be, and we didn't adequately at the time, and this is in 2012, we didn't adequately at the time think about pedestrian access and pedestrian blowout for an event of that size, because we just never thought it was going to be that large. Now, one caveat is February in Indianapolis isn't always the warmest place in the world. Right. But we had an average of like 48 to 53 degrees all week long for Super Bowl to happen in Indianapolis. And that's part of the reason why the NFL and others have considered that to be the best one ever. And we still believe that, those of us that helped be a part of it. But so those are the things that you can learn from, and then be able to communicate that to potential clients, that here are failure points that have happened, and here are ways these are the kinds of things we're thinking about to help you make sure that you're successful through that kind of risk management program.
So Jeremiah, I would say from hearing that, right, clearly you have very deep and even wide expertise, right? You've done a lot, you've seen a lot, you've been through a lot. I can understand that you bring that to the conversations with prospective clients or just people that right, in a face-to-face or a Zoom or whatever it might be. Outside of that, is there anything that you do or your company does to communicate, to share that kind of knowledge, to cast a bit of a wider net that might help from a marketing perspective or even just an education perspective, so that when you're having conversations, people already know kind of the extent of what you can do or your experiences?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I wouldn't be a good consultant if I didn't hire consultants when I needed it. And I was struggling with trying to find that voice and that narrative. So I have, in the last, I think we're like 14 or 15 months now, have been working with a firm in North Carolina. They're phenomenal. Had been one to craft that narrative and to find that voice, and then to be able to build upon that. And so we've done a web rewrite, with a content strategy, and started building on case studies and blog posts and so on. We've increased activity on LinkedIn, which seems to be a place that are getting a little more engagement to help broaden that space. And so I've leaned on them, one, to help get my word vomit into something that is digestible for people to read or hear and understand, and keep it simple. These stories on a podcast are great because you can tell the whole story when you're trying to get someone's attention and explain, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's why we're different. That requires some really good brains to make that concise and digestible for folks. So they have been really great in helping me think about that, but also pulling out some of these nuggets so they can build content around it. And I let them run free. Of course, I have edit power, but there are a few things that they help create that I have very strong opinions on an edit because they know how to talk about those things and write and talk about those
Yeah.
things in the right way. And so as of today, or as of this podcast, we've really been focusing on building more content to tell this story and to tell how it's different, because it is different. And
Yeah.
that's the unique proposition we can bring to people. And so we're still relatively early in that relationship, but we've seen really strong numbers in the right direction, and
Good.
we'll see where it takes us. And we'll
Yeah.
keep evolving, right? Like everything will be a little bit of an experiment, and I'm okay with that because one, I don't know how to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But two, I'm willing if they have an idea to say, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see what the numbers tell us. Again, if I am coming into an organization saying, hey, let's be data informed and systems driven and so on and people powered and all those kinds of things, if I'm not doing the same thing with my own
Yeah.
business with experts that can help me, then that's a really disingenuous message, and I don't want that. I don't want to be a part of that.
What was the tipping point, or what made you decide to do this? So you've been in business for a period of time, and you've built it just based, it sounds like, on doing great work and relationships. But from what I'm hearing, right, there was a tipping point where you decided, okay, I do need to start getting the word out there more. I need to share a bit more of this through case studies or blog posts or LinkedIn. What was it? What made you decide to make that investment and actually do it?
Two reasons. One, I wanted to create a legacy moving forward that we could do really good work and help people and help them do great work, which it's a disservice to the universe if we're not sharing our talent and skill with
Mm,
folks, right? And it's also a disservice if I'm not helping other people share their
yeah.
talent and skill
What
with the
made you decide
universe.
that though? Like where did that come from? The decision about the legacy?
Legacy has always been important, and but I think it's important in a different way. So, for example, I could have named this Jeremiah is the smartest person in the world consulting firm, and I didn't because I didn't want it tied to me. I wanted it tied to, if I can build this correctly, then
Mm-hmm.
this moves on after I'm involved, in a positive way to continue to impact people in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a deliberate decision on my part, and not put my name in the title of the company and so on. Now, here in the early years, has it been largely driven by my personality and my experience? Absolutely. But over
Mm-hmm.
time, I want to step away from that and build it so that it's its own entity. Uh,
Sure.
the second really simple answer to your question is you got to have cash flow to do it. And so I needed to be in a place where I could afford to pay these folks
Mm,
the dollar amount that they require to do the kind of work, the high quality, deep work that I want people to hire me for. I wanted
yeah.
them to do the same and be able to have the appropriate investment to do that. Otherwise, I could have hired someone to just go out there and be tweeting all day for me, but that doesn't tell the story, and it's
Yeah.
too broad. It's not deep enough. And I
Right.
wanted to really get deep into it to make sure we did it right.
So it sounds like it's, a sizable, solid investment that you're making. Any kind of model or that you use to assess, like as you made this decision, what did you want to see, or how did you think about the investment? Was it based on ROI of, like, if I land one client out of this, it's X amount, like it's going to be a positive ROI, or is it I need to have a certain amount of money in the bank, or we need to get to this level of revenue? Was there any kind of model or way that you thought about making that decision to invest in this way in the business?
The first answer is I was selfish and I wanted them to invest in me in the manner I invest in others. So I needed to feel comfortable with them seeing the warts, like the mistakes I'd made, and here's the story I'm trying to tell. Can you help me craft it in the right way?
Mm,
Um, I didn't want them to say, here's our. I wanted a customized approach, which is essentially what I give people. So I was being selfish for me and the firm, not just, hey, I can drive. I mean, we could all have software systems that drive our numbers all day long because
sure.
of the ability that those things do, SEO and AI and other things that can just get you in front of people. But those aren't the people that are going to hire my firm anyway, because um, we have to get past that first, like, hey, we need a consultant. Okay, well, what do we want them to do? Right? Same is true here from a content and a marketing and perspective, in that I needed someone that could dive in there and really help me understand how we get there and how we talk about that deep work. And
Yeah.
that doesn't work if you're just blasting Instagram and Twitter with like, hey, we're out here, we do cool stuff, we call ourselves a young consultant. Like, people are like, okay, scroll on through.
Yeah.
So that's how I thought about it. Related to the revenue, yeah, I had a number I wanted to get to feel comfortable to make the investment, uh, outside of the other things that were already going on. And so I just had to feel, because I didn't want that to be like, well, I can only do so much and then have to stop. I wanted to be able to keep investing and moving forward, again, to build that relationship. So as clients come in and leave, we can start telling the story over time, kind of chronologically. And it builds us kind of a bank of resources that we can use forever,
Yeah.
to keep moving forward.
Before we wrap up, I'll ask you one more question, and that is, how do you define success?
In what way?
What does it mean to you?
Um, well, there are all kinds of ways to answer that. There's personally, there's professionally, there's from a business perspective, there's an impact on the world. So I think I'll stick with the legacy. One of the things I learned working, one, on the host committee of the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, and then two, working for city government, you can have a really large impact on people. And that actually started area of my life we didn't talk about. 100 years ago, in a past life, I was a college basketball coach. And what I loved about that, one, was good at it, obviously, but two, and I kept my hair much shorter, much like yours back then. But what I loved about that work was the relationship you created with the players and the impact you had over their lives for the rest of their lives. Right? You were always their coach, they were always your player, and you were invested in their life all the way through. And there's nothing stronger, except maybe a parent relationship to a student athlete, than a coach in a formative space in their life to help them build their life, a foundation for their life going forward. And I thought that was the greatest thrill in the world. And it really was cool, but it was only for 15 people at a time. And what I saw when we built the Super Bowl in Indianapolis was the impact that an event could have on a community, and the way you could, one, change the event, but also change how a city thinks and operates and so on, to make it better. Then I had the opportunity, again, small p political, to go work in city government. And now you're touching the life of every single person in the city. And if you're doing it right and for the right reasons, and we can agree and disagree, like, you should have done this, or that could have been better, or wouldn't have been great. Right. But at least we were moving the ball forward. And I believe the team we had there together, including the mayor and his senior leadership team, was trying to make the city better every single day and trying to help improve the lives of everyone that lived there. That is powerful. And that's what I think success is. Every time you can touch people and create a lasting legacy moving forward, we've done something right. And that's, since I'm looking at snow outside my window today, check local listings, that snowballs into really large impacts for people. To me,
great.
that would be success.
Love it. All right, Jeremiah, I want to thank you so much for coming on today, sharing a little bit of your story and journey. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you, more about your firm, see more of that content and good stuff that you're going to be putting out. Where's the best place for them to go?
People can find me, Jeremiah Shirk, on LinkedIn. And then the company website is showpiecesolutions, all one word.com.
Okay. We will link that up in the show notes. Again, thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, Michael. It was a pleasure.